Hey, Jeff. Sorry, I can't hear you.
It's just so
There.
cold out right now. I can't even.
Right?
Freezing. I'm also lazy enough not to close any windows, so I don't know. It's no win situation.
And I see we have Mr. Gar.
Yes, hi. I just got in from grocery shopping, so I'm putting everything
Okay.
away. Sorry.
Hey, Ed. Good to have you with us.
Talk to you anyway.
Yeah.
I've been back and forth to New York and busy.
Yeah, great to see you.
Have you been?
We've been good. The team is spread out. David and Todd and Rosetta and myself, but we've been fortunate to keep the representations going. New intakes coming in and existing clients. Obviously, a lot of them are having to make pivots, but we've been fortunate to continue to provide services, which is great.
And the Community Loan Fund, have you been working with them?
We've been talking with them about their, the products and services that they're offering. We've been working with SBDC around the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans and the PPP loans and that stuff. Yeah. Hey, Rashia.
Hey.
Welcome. Yeah, so just saying that it's been. We'll talk a little bit about that, specifically in the context of commercial leasing, which David will talk about when we get started. Rashia, who's Turner, who's our other expert guest, we'll talk a little bit about some of the liability issues that businesses are facing, especially in the MWBE context.
Hi, Rashia.
Hello, how are you?
Good, I'm fine, thank you. Yes.
And Rashia, Ed Swires, a great friend of the Community Economic Development Clinic and the law school, and glad to have him joining us.
Yes, thank you. Good.
Hey, Melissa. So I've got 11:59. We'll give folks another minute or two to join. We will get started at noon. Yeah, so stay tuned. Hey, Dean Queenan.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, how are you? Yes, good.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Yeah. I have to say, it was very easy getting on this Zoom call. And just the other day, I could not get on a call. I mean, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think it might have to do with Wi-Fi or maybe that comes in and out, but I had a real serious problem in this. I didn't have to put in a code or anything.
I think they say that as long as you have like a 2 megabyte download ability, then you should be able to get on and participate. And I know they're doing a lot with encryption, so as long as you have the correct link, you should be fine. So I'm glad that you were able to get on.
Yes, yeah.
Welcome, folks who are joining or have joined. I have 12:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. And as additional folks join, we will invite them into the conversation. I see we have a number of First Mondays regulars, so great to see a lot of familiar faces from names from students, and we're great to have folks from the faculty and the administration and the staff. Um, Great to have Ed Swire joining, who's a friend of the Community Economic Development Clinic and the law school. A couple things. So Pat Rayhan, Professor Pat Rayhan and myself are the co-conveners of the First Mondays program. Unfortunately, Professor Rayhan is unable to join today. She is here in spirit, and we will do our best to reflect her stories and her personality and in the conversation today, and look forward to having her join again next month as we move forward in our First Monday program. For folks who are familiar with First Mondays, and as well as for new participants, this is an opportunity to expand the intellectual conversation among at the law school. We've talked in the past year, most recently last month, we talked about Indigenous communities, the impact of COVID-19 on reservation communities, and Professor Harrington talked about her research around work with Native Americans and international treaties. We've talked about a number of different topics, the border wall and eminent domain. We talked about the opioid crisis and bankruptcy. The focus today is on women and minority-owned businesses, and as they move into the reopening phase of our current situation. How the session will work is we'll hear from our two presenters, and Rashia Turner and David Kraft, who I will introduce in a moment. We'll hear 10 or 15 minutes of a presentation. They'll sort of frame the issue from their perspectives and their expert analysis. Questions from, opportunities for participants to participate both through the chat feature, through Zoom, which, if you're unfamiliar, is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You click on chat. That'll open up the chat box, and you can send messages to the entire group or to individuals. Just a note that if you do we are recording this session, so if you don't want to be recorded just turn off your camera, and also don't engage in the chat, even to individuals, because the chat function is recorded. You can raise hands using by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen as well. I said a couple, okay, so to jump into the topic, we are in an incredibly, we're in an incredible moment right now, both with respect to the pandemic, with respect to the events of the last week. The impact of the pandemic and the impact of police brutality on businesses is far-reaching. Our speakers today are going to introduce the notion of liability that business owners are facing as they come back into operation, as well as commercial leasing issues that and other related access to capital and contracting, dealing with or re-engaging with the customer experience. So I'm going to introduce our speakers and ask them to say a couple words as to lead off the conversation. Rashia Turner is a founder of Wallace Turner Law, which is a Black female-owned law firm in the Capital Region. Rashia represents small businesses and entrepreneurs. She, in addition to her work in private practice, she's had experience in government as well as a public defender. And I think relevant to the conversation too, works in coalition with attorneys and law students around against police brutality. David Kraft is an attorney in the Community Economic Development Clinic, and I'm very lucky to get a chance to work with David. He's been with us in the clinic for almost 3 years. He counsels for-profit and not-for-profit organizations on a variety of business law topics. And has previously served as an Excelsior Fellow in the Governor's Appointments Office. So we're really lucky to have both Ray and David here today to talk to us. I have 12:06 right now, so we'll take maybe 10 or 15 minutes to split the time between the two of you and kind of lead us into the conversation around the particular issues that women and minority-owned businesses are seeing as they attempt to reopen during the pandemic times. So, Rashia, can I turn it over to you?
Okay, yes, you can. David and I had actually David, he informed me of this. It was a group of local businesses, different business owners. They kind of got together to talk about everything that has been going on with COVID, and they expressed their concerns regarding opening. And one of those major concerns was liability. And so they were like, well, what can we do to be safe? You know, can we just be absolved of all liability? Can we enter into some type of contractual arrangement? And so, of course, David and I, we spoke to them about, you know, what would a reasonable person do? You know, that's something we always talk about in law school. And it's like, it really hit home because it's like, okay, well, what would a reasonable person do? If you know COVID is going on, are you going to have 50 people in your space that's only allotted for 75? You know, and so those are things. And so David and I, we were tasked, we're trying to come up with a fact sheet for small business owners, specifically salons and barbershops when it's time to reopen. And so one thing that I did is I drafted a waiver. Not so much a waiver, it's kind of a before you enter. And so it's that customer signing off stating, I haven't been out the country in 3 weeks. I don't have a fever. As far as I know, I haven't come into contact with anyone with corona and things like that. And it's not anything stating that, oh, if you did, you know, you're going to be in trouble. But it's like, as a business owner, that allows me to make an informed decision. And so that's something that we've been working on, and we hope to populate to certain local businesses, also a fact sheet regarding different measures they can implement, such as hand washing. As soon as a customer comes in, have them go wash their hands. You know, no guest with you. You know, if you're coming to get your hair done and your nails done, you're coming by yourself. And if you can't, it's just something you can't do. And I personally think customers are going to appreciate them more for it. Some people are going to be annoyed, but rightfully so. But those are probably the people that we don't want anyway. Those aren't the people that are being safe. And just a little bit about Wallace Turner Law. You know, we're a small business, but we're doing these things for free because if these small businesses aren't around, we're not going to have any clients. And so it's like, what can we do to give back to the community and help, you know, repair the economy? And just, that's my son making a cameo. And we want them to feel safe, and we want them to be safe and not feel like they have something hanging over their head. Because a lot of minority-owned businesses, they're scrutinized a little bit more. Sometimes we're our own worst critics, and, you know, people don't want that. And so I'll pass it along to David because I don't want to go over my time.
No, thank you for that, Rashia, and thanks for having me, everyone. So to follow up on Rashia's point, one of the other important issues that all businesses will face, but in particular when we focus on minority women-owned businesses, especially in the area of the beautician industry, barbershops, beauty salons, in regards to how the reopening standards are going to impact their business operations. You know, some of the reopening requirements are stating that you can only operate at 25% of your business. Well, when you take that into consideration for a barbershop or a salon, how that impacts their daily customer numbers and the amount of revenue that they bring in, it can impact also their current commercial leases, right? So it's likely that many barbershop and beauty salon owners already have existing leases, commercial leases in place. And so with the impact of the revenue, how is it going to affect their ability to continue to make their monthly payments on rent? There were stories, as Rashia said, there were stories of salon owners on the call who said that while their shop has been closed over the past 2 months, they still had to pay full month's rent of $1,500 a month or whatever that might be, right? So from that standpoint, as a business owner, if you don't have any customers coming in, how how are you paying your monthly rental responsibilities? The other thing too is now these salon owners are trying to look, and barbershop owners are trying to look at creative ways to work around these restrictions to still be able to bring in the same revenue, right? So one salon shop owner was saying that she was contemplating having her space operate much earlier than she would normally. Her business operation hours to operate on a much longer basis. So she was talking about, you know, where she maybe currently has her salon open from like 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. She was thinking about extending that, maybe having it open at 5 a.m., right? So then that way she can have people come in very early in the morning or maybe very late at night. So then the thing to think about that is, well, what does the current zoning laws allow in terms of hours of operation? Do we need to look at, from a city standpoint, maybe loosening up those standards to allow certain businesses to have fluctuating hours of operation? So then that way they can have the same amount of customer base as they would normally, so that it wouldn't impact their revenues, right? So that's the thing, that's the standpoint from the commercial leasing or operation standpoint of your physical space. The other part is the access to capital, which is a big one. Yes, the federal government passed stimulus packages that included the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program and the PPP program. I apologize, I forgot what the acronym stands for. So, and those government programs were put in place to assist small business owners with continuing to have capital to continue their obligations, whether that's paying their employees, paying for rents, continuing to pay for benefits and things of that nature. But there has been a lot of issues that minority-owned businesses have encountered in trying to get access to those funds. And so I don't know if we want to go into all that now, but issues around current issues with minority-owned businesses not having existing relationships with banks, from the point of not that they don't have a business checking account but that the fact that they don't have like an existing loan or lending relationship with the bank, to where the banks don't feel comfortable lending, even though these loans are guaranteed.
Can I chime in on that, David?
Yeah, go ahead.
Another issue that came up on a call was one of the business owners, he said he was not eligible to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program because he had a felony conviction.
Right.
Barbershop owner. What does
Right.
that felony have to do with anything?
Right.
And that's something that happened in the past, and that just goes to it not really being about rehabilitation anymore.
Right.
And and it's really messed up, because that's something he should be able to have, for his business, and that that people they don't think about. And
Yeah.
so it impacted him on a different level.
Right.
Also, some businesses, I've been told firsthand that, unemployment, they have that extra $600. So we have people making more money on unemployment that they make in their day-to-day. And so some businesses have started sending out offer letters once they receive the Paycheck Protection Program money to their employees, stating like, listen, when we open back up full scale, you're more than welcome to come back, but I recognize that you need this money, and I recognize that you're getting more unemployment, but to cover my butt, because when I submit for that loan forgiveness, I need you to sign this waiver stating that you are refusing to come back for this time, not specific reasons, but you are, because I have the money to pay you. But do you want your $350 paycheck, or do you want a $750 paycheck while this is happening? And I don't think people should have to choose, but that's the reality. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, and so to piggyback off of Raishia's the point that she raised about the criminal convictions, as we are aware with the criminal justice system, many Black individuals are in the criminal justice system, criminal justice system either incarcerated or, as we know, there's a large percentage of the population that's on probation. And being on probation actually disqualifies you from being eligible for the PPP program. So to Raishia's point, again, if we're talking about making sure that a small business is able to remain in operation and can continue to pay its employees and continue to meet its obligations, what are we doing here when we have these restrictions that we essentially is going to negatively impact a large percentage of minority-owned businesses, or not a large percent of minority-owned businesses, but I should say that's going to have a larger probability of impacting minority-owned businesses because it's like Rashia said, it's likely that somebody might not even have a felony conviction, but just simply might be on probation for some matter that happened in their past. And it's those types of requirements that have been implemented by the federal government that is making it more difficult for minority-owned businesses to reopen during this time. So anyway, yep. So that's kind of what we're working on at the clinic, and in conjunction with the Wallace-Turner Law, on how we can be of assistance from the legal side of things to help minority-owned businesses be able to reopen, to be able to begin operations, have customers, bring back their employees, so then that way they can continue the economic activities for themselves, for their families, and for their community.
I think that's really a great overview, Rashia and David, of the sort of outlining the many issues that are impacting this particular community of business owners, both from the waiver, Rashia, that you were talking about, the sort of the liability that business owners are concerned about. And we have a question that we'll get to in a moment from Professor Brieger about that waiver, Rashia, and that came up in the chat, to the SBA restrictions, which are actually statutory restrictions that prohibit the extension of loans to individuals with particular types of criminal convictions, which is having a tremendous impact, detrimental impact on this community to access credit and to access loans. To what David was talking about with respect to Paycheck Protection Program, the federal government just came out with guidelines on how loans can be forgiven through the Paycheck Protection Program. There are significant issues there too. 75% of the grants of the Paycheck Protection funds need to go to pay current workers. Only 25% can go to pay things like rent or mortgage interest or utilities. In high rent areas or in high rent industries, that's a significant barrier. And a number of senators have communicated with the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and the SBA commissioner around that, or administrator around that point. David, I thought you brought up a really interesting point too around what local government might need to do around altering zoning or business hour. Business hours of operations. If to your point about if a business is seeing in a week what they might see in a day in terms of clientele, we're going to have to accommodate for that and stretch the workday. I was also thinking, potentially there's leasing issues too. Only operate if a business is only allowed to operate during certain hours, the lease may need to be addressed also. So that's sort of an issue between the landlord and the small business owner. So I think that's a great framing point. We'll ask a question from the chat to Rashia, but just invite students and other participants. I know we may also have some accepted or admitted students on the joining us today, so would ask folks to join in with questions over chat or by raising a hand on using the participants link, or throw a hand up. I may not see I'll switch to gallery but if you want to throw a hand up or unmute yourself, those are all ways to participate. But just so jumping on one question from chat, Rashia, from Professor Brieger, were you thinking that with respect to the waiver, Rashia, is that something that the individual customer signs before they go in? I guess there might need to be some type of technology fix there. Can they do it beforehand online, or is it something that they do when they come in person?
The preference would be beforehand, because then that allows that business owner to make that decision. And if that person can't sign a waiver, they can offer that spot to someone else. But I am aware that a lot of businesses, they are not equipped with that. But I think, and we're blessed with warm weather right now. That can be something that's like right at the door. It's like before you can come in, you got to sign it. And if you're not comfortable signing it, great. But it's about the bigger picture, and that's the viability of their businesses long term.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
my listening device out. You're gonna love this song.
And I think there's sort of there's a variety of areas to unpack with what's going on here. I think advocacy both to government around expanding the state and local sort of business hours or zoning. At the federal level, the SBA restrictions around the Paycheck Protection Program and the economic injury disaster loan piece. Just personally, I've been working on a piece of research around the incentives to to employers and the individual the unemployment insurance bonuses, which currently are going to expire. The federal government has provided an extra $600 a week to uninsured individuals. A number of businesses have said that that's a challenge to actually hiring employees to bring them back. So I've got two questions. I see one coming in on chat from Mr. Gaur, and I see Ed Swire has a question too. Let's do, let's have Ed, can you ask your question while I read the question in chat? And I'm gonna unmute you.
Oh, I have to unmute. Okay.
There you go. We can hear you.
Okay. It's not a question. I was just going to say something that Rashia mentioned about tenants having to pay a rent during this, lockdown. And I have a lot of tenants, and I have a lot of tenants that are forced to be closed. And if you're closed, you cannot operate your business and there's no income. I can't think of anything worse, actually. And what we have done, we have talked to our tenants one-on-one. We've given abatements, but in a lot of cases, we've added, let's say it's 2 months or it's 10 weeks of no rent because the individual that owns the business is unable to operate. What we've done, we've added a month or 2 months or more to the end of the lease. Give them the abatement, but extend the lease by a couple months. And we found most of the tenants were very receptive to that. Another option is to pay that rent once you open over a period of time, say the next 12 months or so. I just mentioned that because I think that if you go to your landlord and just say, I cannot pay, there's no income, I don't have the money, but this is what I suggest. I think that a landlord will be receptive to that. Everybody understands that you got to work together.
Yeah, Ed, oh, sorry, Rishi, you were going to say
And
something?
I'm pretty sure I mentioned on the call, just because I'm kind of aggressive sometimes, I'm like, it's a contract. If you don't have it, you don't have it. There's recourses that an individual can take, and so everything is always up for negotiation and discussion. And, God bless you, what you were able to do for your clients, oh God, because they don't have the ability to do that, but it's definitely a conversation that everyone needs to have.
Right.
Well, let me just say that a lot of tenants are using force majeure as the reason that they cannot operate. I know there's a lot of issues with that, and we have a very strong paragraph regarding force majeure. So,
Right.
we're
Yeah,
in
so right. So to your point, Ed, right. I mean, and so then the question becomes, is that tenants have that in their lease, right? That's the first question. The force majeure clause, which states, for those of you who don't know, like if there's any act of God or something that's out of the control of both parties that impacts the ability for the tenant to be able to occupy and maintain the space, that could be a reason for them to be able to either cancel the lease or request an abatement of the lease and stuff like that. So the first thing is, as a tenant, do you have that in your lease? And so for many micro businesses, small businesses who likely did not have legal representation when they entered into a lease with their landlord, it's probably not, right? Likely a lot of landlords, or small landlords, I should say, who rent out commercial space, they probably pick up a form from Staples, which doesn't include that in their lease as well, which is to their advantage. So to your point, Ed, that's definitely one of the leverage tool. That's one of the actual tools that can give tenants leverage to renegotiate their lease if there was a force majeure clause in there. But I think to Ed's point, what you stated and what Rashia stated about the lease being a contract and that it is negotiable, looking for ways to look at the terms of your lease and renegotiate, like Ed said, maybe extending the term of the lease. So then that way you can make the payments on your back end. Other ways we've advised tenants, commercial tenants, is to look at your security deposit. So ask the landlord if they would apply maybe a month or two of your security deposit, or put your security deposit to each month's rent. And then you can reimburse or replenish, I should say, that security deposit at a later time. So yeah, you know, these are things to think about. But I also think that just over the, you know, over the next going forward, I think new commercial leases are going to have to be reconsidered. You know, because as Rashia said, you know, all these documents are contracts. When those contracts were entered into, it was under a different set of facts and circumstances, right? So the understanding when you entered into a commercial lease was, you know, I have full operation of my business. I have the ability to occupy the space of my business for these days of the week, during these hours of the week, at no restriction in terms of capacity outside of maybe what's set by law. Like Horatio said, if your space limits occupancy to 75 people or whatever it might be. But now, due to these laws that are going to be put in place, restricting occupancy to maybe 25% at a time, or no more than 50% at a time of your ultimate occupancy, how does that impact your revenue? This represents a new set of facts and circumstances that might make it likely that your ability to perform under the lease, under the contract terms, is highly unlikely going forward. So could this be a grounds for you to force a renegotiation of the lease if maybe you don't have a very friendly landlord, right? So
Mhm.
a way for you to say, I don't have the ability to perform, right? That's something that we all learn in contract law is, you know, maybe based on the circumstances at hand, does it affect your ability to perform under the contract? And if it does that give you the ability to now say, okay, this contract maybe could be deemed invalid? And so if this contract can be deemed invalid, your ability, again, under the pretense that maybe you have a landlord who isn't willing to renegotiate with you, you know, would that be able to give you an out leverage, right? That can then allow the landlord to find, you know what, maybe I do need to renegotiate because of the current facts and circumstances surrounding our lease agreement. Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, let me say that as a landlord, we need tenants, and I can't imagine having vacant space now.
Sure.
Very difficult to find tenants. And
Sure.
I think that a tenant has a lot of leverage negotiating. And I want to say that I like that idea about a waiver. That's something I haven't heard yet, and I think I'm going to bring that up with the folks at my company. I think that's a good idea, having a waiver to sign. That the small businesses, obviously, they can't have someone there, and they can't have you know, somebody to check temperatures, to ask questions, to sign a waiver, you know, before they actually enter the space. So I think to make that a requirement before you enter, I think that's a good idea for liability purposes. Great, that's helpful. I learned something so far. Oh,
And so, Ed, thanks for your comments, and I think this was an interesting direction. I mean, just noting at Stuyvesant Plaza, you back in March, you took the step that got reported of allowing tenants to I don't know if it was forbear rent for the end through the end of March, and you bring up an interesting point just about how tenants have some leverage at this moment, which is an interesting point. But just from the landlord's perspective, I think you just said it, landlords need tenants, right? And if there's uncertainty in the retail space, there's going to be uncertainty on the landlord side too, right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, a landlord without tenants is in big trouble. And right now, I can't think of a tougher time to find tenants. I mean, if a tenant leaves, it could take 12 to 24 months to find another tenant. So you're better off negotiating, getting less rent, abating rent, picking it up at the end of the lease, maybe extending the lease for a couple months, whatever it takes. And by the way, we have many local tenants, and we have 2 minority tenants, and we have probably a dozen or so female-owned businesses, so as tenants. So, yeah, we got to work with them.
Yeah.
Essential.
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting perspective. I'll just, as sort of maybe to pivot out of this particular point, I'll just share for folks who haven't seen it before, the Community Economic Development Clinic with students in the spring prepared a series of presentations that are available on the law school coronavirus page around commercial leasing in a public health crisis. Both sort of leasing issues in given the current healthcare situation, potential tenant protections to abate rent, and current resources, which we are continuing to update this resource guide. But I think we tried to get at some of the issues that were being discussed here. And so at least to the extent that you have folks on the call in the meeting are having conversations with business owners that are looking for resources, there are some available online here. And if you're interested in the link and having trouble finding it, we can put it in the chat. Maybe I know Ben Myers is usually great at helping out with that. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to pivot to a question that we received on chat from Mr. Gower. And I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. I believe it's Gower. Just with respect to so if you want to correct me, please do.
It's Gower. You got it right.
Gower, great, right on. Cool. So the question is the eligibility restriction mentioned earlier, I think with respect to the SBA economic injury disaster loan and the Paycheck Protection Program, is that something that was part of the stimulus package, or was that something from existing law? Great question. I think particularly around the felony convictions and the prohibition around participation in those 2 programs. I've done a little bit of research on this, but I'll check with David and Rashia first. I'm happy to take that one unless you guys want to.
You can take that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as part of my research on housing insecurity and the CARES Act, I looked in detail both at the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL. So basically what the CARES Act did, so I'll take a moment in a couple sentences, I'll just say what I learned. What the CARES Act did was expand 2 existing small business administration programs. First was the Paycheck Protection Program, which expanded greatly the 7A. 7A tracks the SBA formation organic statute. The 7A program initially funded with $350 billion and then added an additional $300 billion to that program, which was much less. That 7A program already had the prohibitions on lending to individuals with felony convictions. There's a percentage ownership prohibition. I believe it's 20% ownership if you have more than 20% ownership in a business by someone who has a prior felony, then they can't participate in PPP. I don't have that statute in front of me, so please don't quote me on the 20%. I believe it's somewhere around that. The EIDL, or Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, too, has that same restriction. That was in the SBA statute prior to the CARES Act. The CARES Act essentially juiced up or increased funding for 7A and EIDL. EIDL had, I believe it was $10 billion was added through the CARES Act, and that's limited to $1,000 per employee. So those funds are restricted to businesses that are continuing to employ individuals. was initially $10,000, but then was reduced to $1,000 per individual. I'll just say neither of these programs, 7A or EIDL, were designed to get the type of capital out that the CARES Act has allocated. So the initial reports about some businesses like Shake Shack and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and other, there were some hotel chains that were able to access those funds when they were actually supposed to go to very small business owners. There was a lot of reporting around that. I think we will continue to see significant issues and challenges in the program not actually acting the way it was supposed to. There's been less reporting about EIDL just because I think we've seen fewer of those loans go out. I'm going to stop talking and invite other questions or comments either from participants or from our experts. And if we don't, I'll pivot to another question. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about planning and the planning that's required. I think Rashia, when you were talking, and I think David as well. So there's just a tremendous amount of planning that business owners, especially small business owners, are having to go through right now. They're having to talk with their county health boards about, this is our plan to be able to reopen, and they're having to submit those plans to the county in order to be able to do that. Tremendous amount of work and planning that's going in. So I just as a, I see we have another question that came in from Jess Mascaro, and instead of me bringing my rambling to a question, I'm going to read Jess's question. Are there any programs in place to specifically help with reopening at this moment, whether government or nonprofit? I think that's a great question. So kind of, if I understand that overall, is there anything specifically designed for reopening? Has that come up at all in your research, either Ray or David?
It hasn't. If you were talking about reopening after the events of this weekend, that would be a different conversation. But regarding COVID-19, I'm not, as far as I know, no, they have the loans in place that people can apply for, eligibility, things like that. Actually, I want to take that back. Different organizations are developing training programs to assist businesses with reopening post-COVID-19 and different things regarding what they may want to implement and just educating them in the long run, whether it is, renegotiating their lease, having people sign waivers, how to access different capital and things like that. And I would title that as assistance with helping businesses to reopen.
Yeah, to piggyback off of Rashia's point, I know the Community Loan Fund of the Capital Region. If you're not familiar with that organization, they're locally based. They provide access. They provide loans and sometimes grants to small business owners in the area, and they try to target predominantly minority and women-owned businesses. They have partnered with some banks in the area to create a $3 million fund where they're going to provide up to $20,000 in grants to small businesses, specifically trying to target minority, women-owned businesses. I guess that's redundant because that's already their mission. But those who have maybe had trouble maintaining their current working capital needs. But I believe they're also an organization that's going to be providing training to small businesses on ways to reopen safely, and that will minimize the likelihood of their employees and customers being exposed to COVID-19 virus. And one thing to piggyback off of too is I know something Rashia said early on in the conversation about the reasonableness standard, right? So this is we're in a very uncharted territory. So what is that reasonableness standard, right? And how is that going to be set going forward? Because I think when it comes to that liability issue of what duty does do business owners owe to their patrons, the idea to act in a reasonable standard to keep them safe from any potential harms or injury in their space, and generally that's based off of what another commercially reasonable or what another reasonable business owner, how they would operate this is uncharted territory. And so the question is like, what was going to be deemed reasonable? What level of PPE or personal protective equipment is going to be deemed reasonable? And how are the capital needs of that business going to determine that, right? So if one business is maybe able to buy their staff the type of equipment that you see CDC employees wear, like the complete face, head to toe with the face mask, with a plastic face mask and stuff like that, versus another business who maybe the best they can do is to get a couple of face masks and some gloves, and that's pretty much it. Like how are from the insurance company standpoint, because that's going to be something on topic, is like, is this business owner acting in a reasonable standard? But from a litigation standpoint, God forbid, if those issues arise, how will courts assess, what's deemed as reasonable for a business owner in terms of creating not creating a safe environment, but ensuring that their patrons are not exposed to likely injury when they enter their space. So I think that's going to be something interesting, and obviously, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of law review articles and stuff like that written about those standards going forward.
Right. A running subtitle of the first Monday's session is how to come up with a topic for your upper level writing requirement. So I think, David, you ended at an interesting moment or interesting point. Right. With respect, is a waiver enough? A waiver is great at giving notice. Is it actually going to stand up in court? That's a different question. Until it's tested, we won't actually know, but certainly gives notice. And tremendous amount of planning that needs to go in. I also just want to as we advance the conversation, we have time for a couple more questions, maybe one or two more questions. So if someone wants to raise a hand or put something in the chat, please do. I also just want to introduce the language around privilege. In the context of minority or woman-owned business versus someone who's not or has certain types of privilege, there's just so we have some vocabulary to talk about what that means. As a white man, I have privilege where I don't have to think about things that I don't want to, especially with respect to race. And I think what we've seen in the last week, we've seen numerous instances of that. How that plays out in the context of commerce and reopening is significant too. And I think we should be able to talk about that, and you use the language to do that. So to the extent, I think to Jess's question around what is needed to reopen may be different depending on your industry, and maybe different also depending on your community, where you come from or who you are. So I think it bears discussion, and how the law impacts that is significant too. So again, tremendous amount of planning that needs to go into reopening. What David talked about in terms of different types of shields and PPE. Liability to employees is also an issue that we haven't talked about either. We've sort of had a customer focus, have not had much of an employee focus, but that's a significant issue too that business owners have to deal with. Additional, so thoughts or questions. I'll give a brief pause for other voices if someone wants to come in or ask a question. I guess perhaps.
Ed's hand was raised.
Okay, yeah, please, Ed.
Let me see. Okay, I'm unmuted. I just want to say, I think this could be helpful. Can you hear me okay?
You're good.
Good. I think this would be helpful, reopening. We've had a number of tenants that have been reopening over the last couple of weeks, but they have learned a lot about how business has changed. We have a lot of unsophisticated, local businesses that have done things the way retailers have done things for years. But what is required now is to have a presence on social media. And for the first time, we have tenants, Mr. Fuji is an example, and they are now involved with social media. You have to get the word out there because the chain stores, they're experts in that. And they send out email blasts, and they're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And it's just important, I think, for businesses to be, in order to be competitive, you got to be on social media. You got to be communicating with your customers all the time, sending out messages, letting them know that you got specials, letting them know that they could buy something without coming to the store. Because we now have a lot of curbside pickup, not only restaurants, but also some retailers. And very often it's by appointment, or you order something and then you agree on a time to swing by, do curbside pickup, or even delivery. So business is different now. And I think, I mean, for the first time, I actually, with Chipotle, I filled out a menu, I paid for it, and I went over there and I picked it up. And I said, my God, this is really easy to do, convenient. So I'm just saying, you know, well, my generation, you know, we're older, we're not used to that stuff, but I didn't realize how easy it was.
You do that with your groceries.
What's that?
Right.
I said, wait till you do that with your groceries.
Oh, I haven't tried that yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, actually, while Ed was talking about like the different ways of doing business, and we were talking, you just mentioned you were just mentioning, Ed, about, you know, the white privilege and stuff like that. I was thinking about something about beautician industry businesses from a cultural standpoint, right? So like the barbershops and the beauty salons, like at least for, you know, I'm sure maybe this is present in other communities, but a lot of times the culture of like just the barbershops, Black-owned barbershops and beauty salons, that's a place just for people to hang out, you know? It's not generally, you know, yes, obviously people go there to get their hair done and stuff like that, but sometimes that's just a place where people can go to on the weekend or the weekday. They don't even need to get their hair done. They just go in there, they chop it up, they talk about local events and things of that nature that's going on there. So just from like a cultural standpoint, it's like, how is this, you know, the restrictions that are in place from the amount of people that are allowed to gather in a certain place, how is that going to impact, you know, the sense of community for certain communities, right? I mean, like, you know, you see it now, it's become like almost like a TV show and stuff of it in itself, right? Like LeBron James has his show on HBO called The Shop, where people literally gather, get their haircuts and talk. But, you know, it kind of, you know, it's one of those, and it's also a place where people go to sell stuff. You know, I remember growing up and still to this day, you know, you got your local street entrepreneurs who go in there and they got stuff to sell. You know, they got electronic devices, clothes, you know, whatever, wallets and stuff like that. They don't book appointments to go into the shop. They just show up and they say, hey, I got your CD. You know, you get where I'm coming from, your Blu-rays or this or that. So like, how does that impact, you know, that type of environment going forward? And just not in a sense, just for these, there's a lot of non-traditional entrepreneurs. Not a lot of people have storefronts, or not a lot of people do just strictly e-commerce. You know, a lot of people post up on the corner. I know, like, for example, where I went to at Brooklyn Law School, you had street vendors lining up all in front of Brooklyn Law, selling fruits and vegetables, books and things like that. How is that going to work now going forward? And those are a lot of predominantly minority-owned businesses. So, you know, it's something that we're going to your point, yes, businesses are going to have to pivot. You know, sure, and don't get me wrong, but then there's going to be a need for a lot of technical assistance to assist those businesses in pivoting from what maybe their current practices are going forward, or still finding a way to maybe create a safe environment where those types of businesses can operate. So just a thought as Ed was talking that I think was important to share.
I think those are some great points, David, and have generated some comments on chat too, specifically around from Jess. Just noting that's an interesting take. I mean, maybe needs to be talked about more. Obviously, in addition to opening businesses, which we've talked a lot about here and also in the public conversation, how do we reopen the economy, but also how do we reopen communities? I think that's an interesting topic too. We have so I'll just mention that certainly resonating with folks. I guess that's perhaps we can come back to that, but we have a couple additional questions. One specific, DK and is just asking about accommodations for individuals with disabilities and can't wear a face mask. Has that, I haven't seen anything specifically around that. Has that come up in your research, Rachia or David, yet?
It actually hasn't, but I do see a follow-up comment to that below. They some stores are offering to shop for people that can't wear a mask, store and get the things they need when they otherwise can't come in because they don't have a mask. And I think that just goes to creativity.
Right. So yeah, maybe some substitution or maybe some community coming together to provide assistance for individuals. I think that's a great point. Erica has has one question that has a number of components, and I think this is a really important takeaway maybe for us to focus on and as we wrap up over the next couple of minutes. But just for, Erica's asking for people on the call, how can we help? As law students, as members of community, however we define that, as voters and as attorneys in private practice. Great questions. So what do we do about it?
Shop local. Shop local. That's going to be imperative now more than ever. Like definitely shopping local. I'm not going to say most people, a lot of people, they have shopping local can be a bit more expensive, but it's not by the millions. It's not by the millions. Maybe you don't go buy that, that 6-pack of beer for the weekend when you want to hang out, and you take that money and you put it in a small business or something like that. So I think shopping local is something major.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo Rachia's point. Obviously shopping local is going to be important for a lot of these businesses, even if it's buying gift cards for you to utilize at a later time. But giving them that stream of capital so that they can meet their working capital needs is going to be highly important. As law students, there's ways for you to get involved. You have our clinic, the Community Economic Development Clinic, where, you can look to intern or be a clinic intern during the semester. And we're going to continue to work on these types of projects where we're going to try to work with small businesses on all these different topics, whether it's renegotiating their commercial lease. Maybe we look at some stuff around policy issues that need to be enacted locally and statewide to assist minority-owned businesses. People in the private practice, definitely just providing pro bono. Our clinic, we try to do, and Rachia is actually in the Wallace Turner Law Firm has helped us out tremendously with that. We do these small business brief legal advice clinics where we give those small business owners who can't afford private attorneys an opportunity to receive a brief legal consultation with practicing attorneys. And so that's another way, for those private practice attorneys to assist in terms of working with the community. And then I forgot the other group that was mentioned.
Voters.
And voters, I mean, from the voting standpoint is obviously, is getting involved with upcoming local elections and finding out what any candidates, what their positions are, what ideas or agenda items they have for assisting minority-owned businesses. Understanding, because these things, the issues that minority-owned businesses are facing they're being documented. There's plenty of information out there, right? So looking at finding out what these candidates' proposals to help assist minority-owned businesses going forward is going to be important. or making calls to your mayor and your local council people to find out what types of proposals they're trying to work on to assist minority-owned businesses, can go a long way. So.
I think those are all great points. I'll mention a couple things. Connecting, there are a number of law school alums and clients of the Community Economic Development Clinic who are who are both local and engaging in social media. So sort of to connect what Rashia and David were saying to what Ed was saying earlier, folks like Nine Pin Cider on Broadway, and I'm not condoning, drinking more during the pandemic, although we have seen alcohol consumption go up. Nine Pin has done tons of pivoting and is very engaged over social media. One of the owners of Nine Pin is a law school alum, Sonia Del Peral, and Nine Pin has spent a lot of time reshifting their business. They're doing shipping nationally now. They had not done that before. They're doing deliveries on orders over $50. So maybe it's not don't buy the 6-pack. Maybe it's don't buy Bud Light, buy Nine Pin or something like that. Or buy their sparkling cider that is non-alcoholic. They also have food items too. Their pizza is pretty good. I had some over the weekend. One of our clients in the Community Economic Development Clinic, Kyobi restaurant, just opened up at probably the worst time in the last 10 years in March on Lark Street. They've done a lot with some of the food delivery services like Grubhub and Uber Eats. And they have an Instagram page and interact over Twitter too. Around volunteer opportunities, we put something up on Albany Law Link in terms of volunteering with United Tenants of Albany, which is more so on the residential tenant side. We haven't talked about that significantly, but to the extent that some individual business owners live in the Albany area and may be facing some residential eviction, that's something to check out too. So United Tenants of Albany works with individuals around the sort of the coming wave of residential evictions that we expect to see once courts reopen and the eviction and foreclosure moratoria have lifted. So a number of opportunities to get involved. The pro bono program, which is part of the Justice Center at Albany Law School, in addition to the clinic, there are landlord-tenant focused pro bono projects. The Business Law Society works with the clinic around our small business legal advice network. So as we continue to do remote brief advice clinics, there's opportunities for students to get involved. We're 1 minute from 1 o'clock and I want to end on time. I do want to continue the conversation though, if people would like, either virtually, or if for those who can hang around for a couple minutes, please do. But want to thank Rashia Turner from Wallace Turner Law and David Kraft from the Community Economic Development Clinic in the Justice Center at Albany Law School. I want to thank all our participants for joining. Thank you for being here. To students, thanks Ed Swire for joining. To staff and to administrators, thanks for participating. Great to see everyone here remotely. And I look forward to continuing the First Mondays program through the rest of the summer. We're thinking potentially about having something related to Supreme Court cases in July, just because this summer, in the next month, we'll be getting a large number of Supreme Court decisions for this current term coming out. If folks have other ideas or things that they want to talk about that sort of rip from the headlines, please reach out to me or Professor Rayhan. And with that, we'll conclude the official part of our program, and I guess a virtual round of applause for our experts for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, David.
Yep, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. And we were recording. I'm gonna hit stop recording now.